On the night of May 27, 2018, the quiet town of Thousand Oaks, California glowed softly under the yellow streetlights. Inside a small apartment, two young people were laughing, their glasses clinking gently between them. Chad Brandon Amelia, 27 years old, was everything a parent could hope for. A rising accountant, a loving son, and a man with his whole future ahead. He had a steady job, a loyal dog named Athena, and a new love that made him believe in happiness again. Sitting beside him was Brinn Spicer, 26 years old, a brilliant audiologist who had once overcome deafness to help others hear the sound of life itself. That night, they shared nothing more than a glass of Irish whiskey, a few quiet stories, and a small puff of smoke meant to help them relax. But only a few hours later, a scream shattered the silence. When police burst through the door, Chad lay lifeless on the floor, stabbed more than 100 times. Brinn, the woman who once gave voices back to the voiceless, sat in the middle of a blood-soaked room, her hands trembling, her eyes empty, the knife still in her grasp. One life ended, the other destroyed beyond recognition, and what remained was a single haunting question that sent chills across America. What could drive a kind, intelligent woman to turn into a killer within minutes? Was it the haze of intoxication or the darkness already waiting inside her soul? Before the tragedy, Chad Brandon Amelia seemed like the definition of a perfect young man. Born on September 27, 1991, in Santa Clarita, just north of Los Angeles, Chad grew up surrounded by love even after his parents' marriage ended when he was only 5. His father, Sean Amelia, an Irish construction supervisor, and his mother, Michelle, a gentle yet resilient woman, made sure their son never felt the absence of family. From an early age, Chad stood out bright, kind, and athletic. Friends often called him the big brother, the one who always listened, always showed up, never asked for anything in return. At Chico State University, he studied accounting while playing American football, balancing passion and discipline with quiet determination. He dreamed of becoming a certified public accountant, a goal that symbolized everything he valued: precision, stability, and pride. After graduation, Chad moved to Thousand Oaks, renting an apartment with his close friend Vinny Oliveira. He worked full-time at an accounting firm while studying late into the night for the CPA exam. The pressure was relentless, the sleeplessness constant, and that was when he began using cannabis to help him unwind. To his father, Sean, that habit felt like a stain on his son's bright future. Sean despised the smell, the haze, the dullness it brought, but Chad respected his father's boundaries. He never smoked in front of him, never argued. He believed he was in control. No one, not even Chad himself, could have imagined that one small habit would lead him straight into the nightmare that would end his life. On the other side of that story stood Brinn Spicer, born on January 25, 1991, in Chicago, Illinois. She entered the world without sound. Diagnosed with severe hearing loss as a child, she underwent multiple surgeries and received cochlear implants at age 4. For most of her childhood, Brinn hid her hearing aids beneath her long brown hair, terrified of being seen as different. She knew loneliness intimately, but she also knew how to fight it. Her struggle became her strength. She pursued audiology at the University of Washington, eventually earning a doctorate in clinical audiology. By 26, she was working for UCLA Health, helping others reclaim the sounds she once lived without. Outside of work, her world revolved around Aria, her Siberian husky, whom she had trained as a hearing assistance service dog. Together, they were inseparable, a quiet pair, often seen walking through Canio Creek Park, where Brinn went to clear her mind. It was there, in that peaceful park, one late afternoon in April 2018, that Chad met Brinn. He was walking Athena. She was reading on a bench, Aria curled beside her. Chad approached with his easy grin, starting a conversation that turned into several more over the following days. When Brinn politely refused to give her number, he simply handed her a business card, saying, "If you ever want company on one of these walks, text me." Days later, she did, From long walks to shared dinners, to quiet evenings laughing over a bottle of whiskey, while their dogs played nearby, their connection deepened. Brinn was drawn to Chad's sharp wit and steady warmth. Chad admired her courage, her brilliance, and the way she carried her scars like medals of survival. Friends said Chad seemed different, softer, happier, as if he had finally found someone who could understand both his drive and his silence. But just 1 month later, that same woman would become the reason his heart stopped beating. The night of May 27th, 2018, the eve of Memorial Day, drifted over Thousand Oaks with calm air and soft moonlight. Inside his small apartment, Chad Brandon Amelia was preparing a simple dinner. He uncorked a bottle of Irish whiskey, his small ritual for winding down after a long week. Before long, he sent a text to Brinn. "Come over. Athena Mrs. Arya." Around 10:30 p.m., Brinn Spicer arrived, her husky trotting beside her. The apartment filled with life, the sound of paws skittering across the floor, the laughter of 3 friends as Vinny Oliveira, Chad's roommate, joined in. They talked about work, travel, and life's small frustrations. It was the kind of evening that felt too ordinary to ever end in tragedy. Close to midnight, Chad pulled a glass water pipe from the kitchen cabinet. Brinn watched curiously. "It's just cannabis," he said casually. "Totally legal here. You should try it, helps me sleep." Brinn shook her head. She had tried it once, years ago, and hated it. But Chad smiled in that way that made people trust him. "Just 1 puff," he said. "You'll finally see what the hype is about." He stepped out onto the balcony, lit the bowl, and exhaled slowly. The smoke drifted into the night. Brinn hesitated, then joined him. She took a small inhale, coughed hard, and laughed it off, her throat burning. Chad chuckled. "You didn't even feel it," he teased. "Try again properly this time." Brinn gave in. She inhaled deeper. What happened next blurred the line between reality and nightmare. Minutes later, the world around her began to twist. The lights flickered. The walls seemed to breathe. Voices, faint at first, whispered her name. Time folded in on itself. The same sentence repeated, the same laugh, the same movement, again and again. Brinn's body tensed. She said later it felt like time was looping, like she had died and was now watching her own body from above. Inside, Vinny noticed something was wrong. She just froze. He later told police. Her eyes went empty, like no one was in there anymore. Then came the scream. Brinn ran into the kitchen, grabbed knives, scissors, anything sharp, and began stabbing wildly. Chad shouted her name, tried to grab her arms, but she turned on him in a frenzy that defied comprehension. The blade plunged again and again, over 100 times. The room exploded with chaos, dogs barking, furniture toppling, glass shattering. When police burst in moments later, responding to Vinny's 911 call, their body cameras recorded a scene too horrific to ever be made public. Brinn stood motionless, drenched in blood, her face expressionless, the knife still clenched in her trembling hand. When officers ordered her to drop it, she didn't move. They fired a taser 4 times with no reaction. They struck her with batons 9 blows before she finally collapsed. One arm was broken, her neck and face slashed, her hands covered in deep cuts. Athena, Chad's dog, barked frantically beside his motionless body. Arya, Brinn's husky, was bleeding but still alive. Chad, however, it was gone, his body marked by 108 stab wounds. As paramedics rushed Brinn to the hospital, she was barely conscious. When detectives questioned her later, she wrote trembling words on a clipboard because her throat was bandaged shut. "I don't remember anything. I think I died." Sometimes, the line between human and monster is as thin as a single breath of smoke. The next morning, the sun rose quietly over the hills of Santa Clarita. When the phone rang, on the other end was a calm, official voice, a detective from Ventura County Sheriff's Department. Sean. Amelia froze as the words sank in. His only son, Chad, was dead, stabbed more than 100 times inside his own apartment. The suspect was Brinn Spicer. The woman his son had called The best thing that's ever happened to me only weeks earlier. Sean drove for over an hour to Thousand Oaks, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his hands went numb. By the time he arrived, yellow police tape fluttered in the wind. A young officer handed him Athena's collar, still stained with dried blood. Sean later said in an interview, "That apartment wasn't my son's home anymore. It was hell." But true hell came moments later, when he had to tell Michelle, Chad's mother. He couldn't call her. He couldn't let her hear that kind of news through a phone. He drove straight to her house. When she opened the door and saw his face, she didn't need to hear a word. Sean said quietly, "I watched the light leave her eyes. That was the moment I lost her too." After the funeral, Michelle sank into deep depression. She stopped smiling, stopped taking photos, refused to celebrate anything. She told friends that to smile would dishonor my son. Her grief became her prison. She stopped taking her diabetes medication, stopped eating properly, stopped caring. 18 months later, she died of cardiac failure, her heart literally giving out under the weight of sorrow. When someone dies from 100 stab wounds, we call it murder. But when someone dies because their heart can't carry the grief anymore, what do we call that? While Chad's family was drowning in loss, Brinn Spicer was recovering from surgery, her throat stitched shut, her arm in a cast, her body covered in bruises. Unable to speak, she answered detectives' questions in writing. Her first words, "I told him no, but he made me do it." That single line split the investigation in two. Was Brinn coerced, or was it a calculated attempt to erase guilt? She claimed she remembered nothing after the second inhale, only blinding white light, looping voices, and the sensation of watching her own body from above. Her description was so vivid, so surreal, that detectives felt a chill. Some wondered if the cannabis had been laced with another substance. Toxicology reports, however, found only THC, nothing else. The case was no longer simple. The woman once known for restoring sound to others had now silenced a man forever. When Brinn was transferred from the hospital to the county jail, the public divided. To some, she was a monster, a killer hiding behind a medical excuse. To others, she was a victim of her own mind, destroyed by a drug society insisted was harmless. And through it all, Sean sat each night in Chad's old apartment, keeping everything untouched: the mug, the notes, the open notebook where Chad had written his final line, "CPA exam next week. Don't give up." He never did. But the world did. For 5 long years after that night, the name Brinn Spicer echoed through the courtrooms of California, a name that stirred outrage, pity, and confusion in equal measure. The trial was delayed again and again, motions for extensions, mental health evaluations, and later, the COVID-19 pandemic. Each time a letter from the court arrived announcing yet another postponement, Sean Amelia felt the wound in his chest reopen. In one interview, he said quietly, "I don't need her to die. I just need someone to admit my son's life was worth more than the word accident." Finally, on November 9th, 2023, the long-awaited trial began at the Ventura County Superior Court. The courtroom overflowed with reporters, legal observers, and strangers drawn by morbid curiosity. In the front row sat Sean, his hair now silver, his face hollow from years of sleepless nights. At the witness stand stood Brinn Spicer, now 32 years old. Her dark hair fell past her shoulders, scars faintly visible along her neck. In front of her sat a real-time transcription monitor, converting every spoken word into text. She could read a haunting image of irony. The woman who once helped others here now relying on screens to understand the world around her. Her voice trembled as she began recounting that night. She said that after inhaling the second time, everything shattered. Time looped. Voices filled her head. She saw herself dying, then floating above her own body. When the prosecutor asked, "Were you forced to smoke?" she shook her head and whispered, "Not forced, but I was scared to say no." That single line became the foundation of her defense. Her attorney argued that Brinn had been psychologically coerced, that she had suffered a cannabis-induced psychotic break, losing control of her mind and actions. He called expert witnesses, who explained that THC, especially when contaminated or consumed by inexperienced users, could cause temporary psychosis, hallucinations, or dissociation. Even Vinny Oliveira, Chad's roommate, took the stand. He admitted he had smoked from the same pipe earlier that night and felt dizzy, lightheaded, almost like dreaming. His words sent a ripple of silence across the courtroom. In a courtroom, truth isn't always what decides a verdict. It's the story that the jury believes. But the prosecution wasn't silent. They presented text messages Brinn had sent to friends months before the killing, messages bragging about eating cannabis edibles, about getting so high she skipped work. The prosecutor raised her voice, holding the printed messages up for the jury. This is not a naive woman who didn't know what she was doing. This is someone who chose to use and someone who killed. The defense faltered. Their argument of innocence under intoxication weakened in South. A forensic psychologist testified that Brinn had no prior history of mental illness, suggesting her violence stemmed from choice, not psychosis. After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The air inside the courtroom was so heavy it felt impossible to breathe. Then came the words. We find the defendant, Brinn Spicer, guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Not murder, not intent, just accident. On January 23, 2024, sentencing day arrived. Brinn received 2 years of probation and 100 hours of community service, no prison time. She wept. Sean stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on her. Then he turned and walked out without a word. Law can end a case, but justice dies with the victim. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom was so crowded that people stood shoulder to shoulder. The air felt thick not with anger, but with exhaustion. When Brinn Spicer took the stand one last time, she looked small beneath the weight of her own silence. Her hair fell across her face as she spoke, voice trembling. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to say, I'm sorry. No one answered. Then, from the front row, an elderly woman rose to her feet, Chad's grandmother. Her hands shook as she unfolded a piece of paper, her voice barely more than a whisper. You took my grandson from me, she said, but I forgive you, because if I don't forgive, then God won't forgive me either. The room broke. Reporters wiped their eyes. Even the judge looked down, but Sean Amelia, Chad's father, didn't cry. His expression was blank, not out of hatred, but from a grief so deep it had gone beyond tears. As he walked out of the courthouse, cameras caught him, saying quietly, 2 years of probation, that's not justice. My son doesn't get a second chance. In cases like this, no one wins. The living are not survivors, they're carriers of memory, condemned to live with the echoes of what can't be undone. Outside, the world argued. Some called the sentence merciful, others called it a mockery of justice. But for both families, there was no victory, only 2 broken lives that could never be pieced back together. Months later, on a quiet April afternoon, Sean returned to Caneo Creek Park, the place where Chad and Brinn first met. He sat on the same wooden bench, now faded by time. The wind rustled through the trees, and from somewhere far off came the faint sound of a dog barking. He couldn't tell if it was Athena, or just the echo of memory. Maybe evil doesn't begin with the knife. Maybe it begins the moment we believe one small breath, just one harmless escape, can quiet the pain inside. But sometimes, that single breath of smoke is all it takes to turn love into tragedy.